Good morning. My name is Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys. Schindler's Attorneys are a co-founder of COBRA. We are going to have a targeted webinar today, targeted in the sense that we're going to be dealing with forensics. We have another associate partner of COBRA, David Loxton. He's going to be presenting today. The idea is that he takes us through the forensics and how forensics will find application in the context of distressed companies. And as an example, in our webinars, on our daily webinars, our usual webinars, we deal with the fact that business rescue practitioners have certain reporting obligations, and business rescue practitioners have an obligation to investigate. So there may very well be a need for forensics once a business rescue practitioner comes in. So I'm going to take you through who Dave Loxton is, and then I'm going to hand over to Dave Loxton. Before I do so, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. We are also joined by Dean Wright. He's a partner at Schindler's Attorneys. We have Peter Gordon, who is a business rescue practitioner at Engaged Turnaround. We have Francois Ackerman, who is from the IQ Business Group, and we have Gary Barkovitz, who is from Schindler's Attorneys. Dave Loxton has been around for some time. So I'll start with his professional qualifications. He has an MBA from the University of Cape Town. He has an LLB, University of Cape Town, a BCom, also from Cape Town. He's a certified fraud examiner. He is he's certified by the fraud examiners of the USA and locally. He has been a state prosecutor, a practicing attorney, an in-house counsel. He has focused on employment law and litigation. Currently, he's very, very much involved in commercial crimes. He's involved in the investigations, forensic due diligences, fraud risk assessments, and regulatory training and advice. He's the member of the Law Society of the Northern Provinces and the Cape, now the Legal Professions Council, Institute of Commercial Forensic Practitioners. He's a past director of the South African chapter of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. He's a post-committee member of the South African Society of Labour Lawyers. He's currently serving as an honorary patron of CGF Research Institute. He's acted as an assessor in the former Labour Court of Appeal, and he's acted as a judge with Judge Cato Regan and Jeff Badlander in moot competitions several years ago. So that's quite impressive, David. I've known David for some time. We've been colleagues for 22 years. He's been at, he's held some enviable positions in his career, as I've just articulated. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Maurice. I struggle to recognize myself in that one, as you say. I've been around a long time, so I suffer from the old timers disease. Right, let me share my screen. All right, let me just get rid of that. All right. So what we're going to be focusing on, as Maurice said, is forensics in the current climate. The current climate being the lockdown. So we have this act of God, which has led to two real consequences. The good is more time with family, although many people would say that's bad, but let's take it as a good. And then the bad is obviously the increased business risk. So those are the two points which I want to commence with as the context of this morning's talk. Now, if one looks at those two consequences, the good and the bad, what do you do as a businessman? Do you sue God, like Billy Connolly tried in the well-known movie The Man Who Sued God, or do you mitigate your risk? Now, I would say that at the moment, your risk has gone through the roof. And I will take you through the points which is my hypothesis as to why I say that. Essentially, years of tried and trusted protocols are no longer of any force and effect. If you think about it, business was structured over time to have people in an office. That was how the whole underlying ethos of a business was: we will trade as the following, we will sell the following goods or services, and we will plan to be in the office environment. And what we're having now is that those tried and trusted protocols are no longer applicable. You would find that your IT department has assured you that your systems are like Fort Knox. Again, no longer relevant. Those IT systems were designed for people in one building, one environment, maybe with a decentralized business that it would apply to a business in Cape Town and Joburg, maybe Bloemfontein, maybe Durban. But now, with people working at home and remotely, all those protocols have fallen out the window. So your business risk has essentially gone through the roof. The big thing is the change. We didn't have time to plan for the changes. In 2019, this fellow would have been seen as a lazy bastard. Now he's seen as a responsible adult. The change has been dramatic. The timing has been even more threatening in the sense that we didn't plan for it, we didn't have time to plan for it, and now many of us have been caught with our pants down trying to play catch up for these changes. Essentially, if one looks at history, in boom times, fraudsters can paper over their cracks. When they're printing money, when the business is booming, it's easy to commit commercial crime because no one's really caring because they are making money. Now, with slowdowns coming, then those cracks then show. Many of the major scandals in the last 20 years were uncovered in the slowdown. It's very similar to what I think many of us will have seen. Certainly in my practice, I've seen it where you get executives receiving their bonus every year for 2 or 3 years for making magnificent money for the company. They then get a promotion or they move on. A new guy comes in and he says, oh, hang on, that guy didn't spend any money on maintaining our fleet. He didn't spend money on maintaining our IT systems. The new guy then has to spend a small fortune on playing catch up and getting all the maintenance done. And he looks bad because now he's no longer showing such a big profit. But he's doing the right thing for the business. Very similar to what we're seeing now with the unplanned for changes, that the risks only come to the fore in these particular times. I think the point I want to make, which I maybe didn't make clearly enough there, was when I'm talking about changes and the protocols, I'm not just talking IT. I'm talking your fundamental way of doing business. So it'll be your sales, your purchases, your procurement. All those protocols are now under threat because of the remote working. Everyone is working from home now. I saw an article, a news clip that came through to me yesterday. Like many of you, I'm sure you subscribe to these news clips and online media, and I get from many of the law firms around the world. And I see that most of the major Australian law firms are opening their offices, but only catering for 10% of their normal staff to go back to work. So the new norm is people working remotely, and that has its own challenges. If everyone's working from home, you now have family pressure, where your spouse or your children might have been used to not seeing you until the evenings. Now you're at home all day. There's social pressure, and of course, the financial pressure, which speaks for itself. With all that's happening in the economy, with the lockdown, there is enormous financial pressure on virtually every single business. I look at my business. My pipeline is looking fantastic for the year in February. With the lockdown, everything's on hold. People don't want to take risks. They don't want to spend money unless they know what's going to be happening. And I think many businesses are under that kind of pressure. So it then poses the question, with more time on their hands, with the family pressure, the social pressure, with the financial pressure, does this increase the pressure to commit fraud? And my hypothesis is yes, indeed, it does. Remember the fraud triangle. With the new threat being economic survival, the fraud triangle is particularly apposite. So the fraud triangle is a well-known tool used by investigators over the years, used by bodies such as the FBI, Scotland Yard, all international law enforcement agencies use the fraud triangle as an underlying basis for their investigations to try and see who would be the likely candidates to commit commercial crime. So the first point in the triangle is the pressure, the underlying pressure to commit fraud. The second point is the opportunity, and the third point would be the rationalization. So if one looks at pressure, that is keeping up with the Joneses. You're now under pressure to commit fraud because your neighbor has bought a new car, or your spouse is shouting at you saying, our neighbor's always going on holiday and we aren't. Or now you're at home all the time, you can now have time to observe what your neighbors might be doing. You peer over the garden fence and you see his new Porsche in the driveway. So you're under pressure now to keep up with the Joneses. The pressure is there to commit fraud. Opportunity is particularly apposite, because the opportunity would be things like lack of segregation of duties. There's no one peering over your shoulder. There's the opportunity now with you having all the time at your hands, on your hands while you're sitting at home, and no one keeping an eye on what you're doing on the internet. You could be researching how to commit fraud. You could be researching how to alter checks, or not checks, people don't use checks these days, but how to alter payment details. So the opportunity is definitely there. And then, of course, there's the rationalization, and that's more to do with the psyche of the fraudster. Rationalization is, I did it for a very good reason. I've been working my butt off for the last number of years. I don't get paid enough. My bosses get paid a fortune and they do nothing. This is actually my money I'm taking. I deserve it. Or it could be even more radical than that. I had a very unfortunate experience a few years back where a person I knew, a very, very good attorney, I can't say he was a friend, but certainly he was a very, very good colleague and a good acquaintance. He stole from the firm's trust funds. Now, people judge him saying you're an attorney, it's terrible and everything, and that's the instinctive reaction. But when you look at the underlying circumstances, he had a 3-year-old daughter who was suffering from leukemia, from cancer, and his medical aid funds dried up. Medical aid stopped paying, and so in desperation to pay for a medication, he then stole from the trust funds. So the rationalization is, this is to keep my daughter alive. It was a tragic matter because the poor guy got struck off the roll of attorneys. He ended up committing suicide and his daughter died. But that's kind of an aside. But the rationalization is I did it for a particular reason. And in his case, I would submit that many people would do the same. So if one then focuses on IT, which is the new space of commercial crime, all the stats are showing that the commercial crime committed through the cyberspace is outweighing all the proceeds of other white-collar crimes put together by a long way. So cybercrime is the place to play, the space to play, and I beg your pardon, if you're a fraudster. So basic issues like your employees at home. Can their neighbor access their Wi-Fi? I mean, I log onto my laptop or my computer every day. I can see at least 4 to 5 of my neighbors' Wi-Fis coming up on my screen as I could access them. One of them, there's no security at all. I could simply log on. Others have security, but probably not great. Likewise, with your employees, can their neighbors access their Wi-Fis? How secure is your server at work? If your employees are logging on remotely, who else is through them? Who's piggybacking onto them? Who's hacked into their particular system? So how robust are your IT processes? Go back to what I said earlier. Your IT processes were structured for the office environment. Now you've got your people working remotely. What processes do you have in place to protect them and protect your business? Have you ensured that all your employees have virtual private networks installed that only work through a VPN? We are using Zoom at the moment. You've no doubt all seen how Zoom has been criticized for the lack of security. Likewise, there's been a trend of hackers accessing the voice over internet protocol telephones. Now, very few of us have telecom landlines these days. We use VoIP. and that's been the new platform for fraudsters and the scammers to access. So those are all underlying issues that you would need to be aware of, that are particularly apposite with your employees working at home. Your IT people should be, or if they haven't already, they should be ensuring that all your processes are adapted for the remote environment. And if they aren't, you should ensure that they start right now, because that's where you are very, very badly at risk. As alternatives to Zoom, I mean, Microsoft Teams is considered a far more secure platform, but those are the issues which you and your IT team should be considering. What other threats are there? There's always been a tension between privacy and business managing its risks. Now I'm picking up a lot of employees and people are becoming absolutely paranoid about what they perceive to be invasions of privacy during the shutdown. There's already talk from many commentators that the government will utilize the shutdown to make certain that they are playing Big Brother in a far bigger way into the future. We won't regain our rights that we had previously. There's less focus on privacy because of the emergency. People will accept a lot more invasion of their privacy because of the virus and the shutdown. But employees certainly are paranoid. I've seen emails that clients have sent me where employees are taking them to task, and people are putting their feet down and saying, we actually want to ensure that we remain private. When we work at home, we don't want you accessing what we do. We don't want you looking over our shoulders. So you might, for example, face a demand from your employees that you update your policies to protect them from issues such as you having the right to peruse their emails. Many employers have policies in place which gives them the right to peruse emails because it's the work server that's utilized. Now the employees will say, well, hang on, I'm working from home. Even though I'm working, you have no right to access my home environment. And that creates quite a tension between your right to protect your business and your employees' rights to privacy. The other issue is obviously job security. Your employees might well demand that you implement a non-retrenchment policy, which must run for a number of years. Now, those of you of my age, maybe slightly younger, will probably recall that in the old days, Pick n Pay tried a non-retrenchment policy. Raymond Ackerman was of the view that if his employees had job security, they'd be more loyal to him and he'd have better and more productive workforce. Well, it didn't work because he still faced as many, if not more, strikes than other retailers. The shrinkage in Pick n Pay was just as bad as ShopRite and other places, so it didn't really work. And certainly, if this was in fact an issue before you, where your organized labor or your employees themselves come to you and say, we want to know that our job is secure for the next number of months or years, that you will implement a non-retrenchment policy, my advice would be, don't even think about it. But the whole ethos of business is agility. You need to be able to adapt and be quick in your adaptation. And if you're locked into non-retrenchment, that might well negate that particular agility. Now, you might ask why I'm commenting on HR issues in the context of a forensics or fraud talk. The simple reason is unhappy employees and disgruntled employees make for potential fraudsters and thieves. If they feel aggravated, if they feel irritated with the employer, if they feel the employer is not looking after them, they are far more ripe for the plucking when it comes to committing fraud, either through their own circumstances, or they might be tempted. You know, I had a case not that long ago where a syndicate hacked into a major listed entity simply by standing at the entrance to the company and dishing out flash disks, free flash disks to people walking in. And the average employee thought, fantastic, a nice free flash disk, plugged it into their laptop or their computer, wham, there was the malware planted on the server, on the system and the server, and these hackers then had full access to that particular company and they went mad. So disgruntled employees would be even more ripe for that kind of issue, where you might have a policy in place that you aren't allowed to plug in an unknown flash disk. They might say, well, hang on, you refused me my bonus, or you didn't increase my pay, or you've retrenched 5 of my buddies. they're disgruntled, they are now ripe for the plucking. What about the new threat with the lockdown creating a perfect storm for fraud in the sense of a total breakdown in morals and ethics? Is this the new norm? I mean, I know of a couple of colleagues of mine who are consultants and small law firms telling me that they are desperate because major listed companies have refused to pay them, basically saying, sorry, with the lockdown, we've cancelled all payments until we know where we stand and where we're going. And for a small business, that can be absolutely crippling. That could actually face bankruptcy. You might find your customers claiming poverty and refusing to pay you, citing an act of God. They're saying, right, because this was something which no one could foresee, we are now able to resile from the contract. And there's impossibility of performance, and you then get into that kind of dispute. Many people have been caught with their pants down where their contracts are silent on pandemics, and people looking not to pay or not to honor their obligations will say, well, the contract doesn't mention it, therefore we are entitled to resile. So a lot of people are now scrambling to amend contracts and the like. You might find that certain of your customers are absolute chances. You know they're able to pay. They're simply taking a chance. Like the example I've given you of these big companies refusing to pay my colleagues. It's not a case of they can't pay. They've simply seen a chance and an opportunity, and they are now taking that particular gap. So this new threat, the lockdown, to my mind, has created a perfect environment, not just for fraud, but for, let's just call it a moral and ethical breakdown in the way of doing business. You know, where business used to have the approach, we'll do business the right way. Now, what one's finding is we're in a straight case of survival. And when people are fighting for survival, their moral compass and their ethical compass shifts, and they will do anything to survive. And that then leads to what I call the perfect storm. So, to put it colloquially, with the shutdown and the new circumstances, the new environment, we find that there's going to be a lot of corporate nudity. A lot of corporates are changing their way of doing things. What we simply don't know is how many businesses have taken up naturism. We call them nudists, but how many have actually become nudists? That we don't know. But certainly my sense is, and when I'm looking at the international commentators in the States and the UK and Europe, they're all saying we are going to see such a spike in fraud and corruption over the next number of months, and probably 18 months to 2 years, because business is doing everything it can to survive. We will only see in time to come how much of this corporate nudity is actually exposed. So I've given you a whistle-stop tour of what I foresee happening. A spike in fraud, a spike in corruption, a spike in corporate bullying, a spike in shifting compasses, and a change in morals and ethics, a change in the way of doing business. How do you mitigate your risk? Because obviously you as business people or advisors will want to know what processes one can take to actually mitigate. So I think what one needs to do is almost like a zero-sum, a zero-based budget. So review all your processes from scratch, taking your new reality into account. So your business was structured with an office environment in place. Now you have to look at your structures and say, well, only 10% of us will be in the office, 90% will be working remotely. What processes do we have in place to protect our business and protect our employees? Because you certainly don't want your employees taking opportunities and seeing gaps which will expose you as a business, but likewise, you might need to protect your employees from their own shortfalls. As an aside, I did a very interesting case for a major company not that long ago, where they thought they were doing the right thing by setting up their employees at home. This is a couple of years back. And they said, we will save rental, we will save office space, we'll set these guys up at home. And it was a particular department they saw, the business saw making sense to work from home. And they actually paid for IT, they paid for desks, they paid for computers, they paid for everything, which sounds like a fantastic deal. Then a number of the employees had the psychology that they couldn't work from home. And so from being top employees, they became bad employees. And in fact, the one guy actually ended up being fired for poor performance. And he then took the matter all the way to the Labour Appeal Court, and I ran it for the company. And there was a lot of expert evidence that certain people are simply unable to distinguish between work and home, and those guys do not fare well in a home environment if they're working remotely. So you need to take that into account. So the point I'm making is, as a businessman, you need to have empathy. And it's not one size fits all. There might be employees that it simply won't work for them if they have to work from home. The second point I'm making is you need to vet your contracts, your policies, and your systems. And there, you need to engage experts. All of us as lawyers will have seen clients who will take a contract and they'll copy and paste to save time and money. They'll say, we don't want to pay a lawyer to draft a new contract. We can just take an old one and cut and paste and change some details. And it's only when the contract is exposed in a court with an advocate and a judge unpicking it and saying why it's unenforceable that the business realizes it was penny wise, pound foolish. So engage the experts for your contracts, engage the experts to review your policies and your systems. You need to review your insurance. If your policy does not cater for acts of God or does not cater for pandemics, you need someone to review that for you. You might need to alter and amend your insurance policies. Likewise, you need to review your insurance for your current environment. If your fleet is standing still, why should you be paying premiums as if those vehicles are on the road? There should be some kind of payment holiday. When it comes to the IT side, I suggest that you should work with ethical hackers and IT consultants to test your systems and test your IT exposure. And please, this has got to be escalated to board level. You can't allow IT risk to be managed at a junior management level. It's got to be at board level. Do you have a whistleblower hotline? Now, those of you who follow the commentary on fraud and corruption will know that the stats show worldwide that fraud is only uncovered by your statutory audit in 10% of cases. Internal audit, 10%. It's your hotlines that expose 40 to 50% of your fraud and corruption. So if you don't have a whistleblower hotline, you certainly should get one in place for people to report. I put up this slide to show my new monthly budget for petrol is zero, entertainment is zero, clothing is zero, but groceries like $8.5 grand. I've had to change my way of approaching life. You need to change your approach for running your business as well. Individuals have had to adapt. Likewise, business must adapt, and it's all risk-based. Whatever you do is risk-based. So what you'll be looking at is saying, right, we used to work in an office. Now we've got people working remotely. What is the risk and how do we manage that? Which is essentially what business does all the time. As business people, you assess a risk if you're going to make an investment or purchase a company or move premises or even whatever you're doing, you're always assessing your risk and trying to mitigate it. And that's what you're doing in this particular time. So, pulling the threads together, you can't sue God, even though Billy Connolly tried. So try and enjoy the upside. The younger generation have been saying for a long time they want the work-life balance. They don't like the lifestyle of people my vintage, who grew up where it was seen as the done thing to spend 14 to 16 hours a day working and far less time with family than one should. Now, we all need to start adapting and enjoying the upside of your family time. Adapt to the new normal. Remember the fraud triangle? The pressure, the opportunity, and the rationalization is particularly opposite now, particularly with the pressure on people to commit fraud simply to survive. People's compasses do shift. You might know, again, to give a statistic that's accepted worldwide, if you take a group of 10 people, out of every 10 people, there'll be one who will never, ever commit fraud, one who will always commit fraud no matter what, and then the 8 can be moved. They have a moral compass that can shift depending on the circumstances. How robust are your systems and processes? And I've said that you should engage the experts. The impact of HR on the fraud risk, I'm emphasizing the point, disgruntled employees make for potential fraudsters, disgruntled employees steal. review your policies, your contracts, your insurance. Go back to basics. You really need to engage people, whether it's your in-house counsel, your financial team, your IT team, or expert outside consultants or outside counsel. But you need to review all those policies and contracts and your insurance policies to ensure that they can cater for the current norm. The Stone Age didn't end because he ran out of stones. It ended when alternative options opened up for humanity. The point is, in a crisis like this, there is always opportunity. And those of us who adapt and look for the opportunities in the current environment will certainly flourish. Certainly what I'm seeing is a lot of bad. There's been a huge spike in fraud in the non-profit sector, which is so sad, and corruption and theft. But there's also been a lot of good. I don't know if any of you saw the news report that there was a spa in Cape Town that has stopped selling certain products to support essentially competitors. But it says the community needs a small business around them. So they have stopped selling the products that those people sell, and they're saying to their customers, please go and support them. We need these small businesses to survive. So that's the new norm. And it might be that more business will follow what that particular spa owner, that spa franchisee has done, which will certainly be good for all of us. And that, everyone, is what I have to say. And the floor is now open to questions and comments and input from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. That was great. Whilst we wait for questions, I just want to explore the question of essentially what is an ethical hacker. And the starting point, what I want to ask you, David, is does every human being have a breaking point? So in other words, will every single one of us, are each one of us a potential criminal? And the only question is, at what point do we break? Okay, so if the answer to that is yes, so in other words, the mother will steal to feed her baby, the question I have is, in the context of labor law and companies, okay, what does one do if we know that every single human being has a breaking point? Do employees, ought they be dismissed if the situation is desperate?
Yeah, Maurice, it's a very good point. And I go back to the point I made a few moments ago, that if you take a group of 10 people, there'll only be one of those 10 will never ever commit fraud or corruption, no matter what. But the average person are like that attorney I mentioned who stole from trust funds because of his daughter. And certainly, I think that there is a breaking point for virtually every single one of us. So depending on the duress, you can be shifted to save your family, to save yourself, to save your livelihood. So then that goes to, what can employers do to mitigate their risk and protect themselves or their employees under those circumstances? And that's extraordinarily difficult. What it essentially would lead to would be, I think, far more management by walking around, to put it colloquially. Walking around is communicating with your employees. You need to understand your employees' stresses. You need to have some kind of line for your employees to open up and say, look, I'm actually facing financial ruin if you guys reduce my pay by 50%. I can't service debt. I can't service my bond. I can't do the following, and then engaging with that particular employee, one could then see if there are any solutions. It might well be that you can't, that for the business to survive, you would need to reduce people's pay, which is leading to that particular stress. But then one might be able to point that particular employee to a third party, a bank, or some other body that could assist. So I think it's going to lead to a lot more, or it should lead to a lot more communication and understanding your employees. And I think a lot of businesses should now be looking at that particular approach, saying, well, we need to have systems in place where, number one, we want to mitigate our risks so we know who the potential fraudsters and thieves are, but also to try and help employees. I mean, definitely, I think there needs to be a lot more empathy from employers now, because times are hard. and all of us are facing the pinch. So Maurice, it's a very difficult one to answer in kind of the time available to us. It'd be quite an interesting debate, as to what employers or what companies should do. But I think to my mind, the starting point would be communication. If you don't know what your employees are facing and what the stresses are and what might lead to that particular employee changing their moral compass, then you certainly won't be able to help.
Just thinking out loud now, that would just along the lines of your thinking, a lot of companies have set up funds, life and death funds, or that employees can in fact access if they require money for the purpose of emergency expenses. So that in itself would be a way to mitigate any risk on fraud. Surely, I mean, if they have access to money, then you'd find that people won't be stealing to feed their babies.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing is but you obviously need the correct protocols in place to ensure that the need is genuine, because you'd always get your odd chancer that would see an opportunity to, put money away for an overseas trip in the future, or fund something, or fund a drug habit or a gambling habit or whatever. But yeah, I think that it's a good point. Those kind of funds would certainly assist in mitigating risk.
David, just on that score, can you talk to the audience around lie detectors, and the use of lie detectors in this context?
Yes. Look, a lot of companies use lie detectors right from the pre-employment stage. They will, before engaging someone, they will insist that they undergo a lie detector test. Employers use lie detectors for the disciplinary process. Now, in law, a lie detector is admissible only in the context of supporting evidence, as it were. So you can't dismiss someone simply based on a lie detector. If the lie detector results support extraneous evidence, then it is admissible, and it strengthens the particular case or the particular argument. But a lie detector as a tool in the context of this morning's discussion would certainly be a useful tool. Because what employers might want to do is say, right, we are going to engage our employees on the basis of a risk-based approach. We want to mitigate our risk for fraud, for theft, for people stealing from us, for people defrauding us. So we are going to, might be a quarterly basis, might be a monthly basis, whatever the employer decides, ask people to undertake a lie detector test, just so we can ensure that they aren't engaged in crime, in some form of corruption. It would certainly be a useful tool to mitigate risk. The difficulty would come where the employees say, no, we simply aren't going to, we refuse, it's an invasion of our right to privacy, and then one gets into that kind of argument. So I would engage employees, and before instituting that, I would certainly engage with them and give them the underlying rationale that you aren't there just simply nail people. You're not going to use a lie detector test to simply find out who might be surfing the internet for porn or doing things in their private life which you aren't interested in. It's simply a tool to help mitigate risk, and effectively it would help all the employees in the entire company if the employer can mitigate that risk and prevent fraud before it happens.
I know Investec, as an example, on our bookkeeping staff, in light of the fact that they deal with trust funds, they insist on background checks, and in fact they do background checks themselves. If the employee doesn't consent to that, what can the employer do?
In the context of a background check,
a third party insisting on a background check. So it's not even the employer, and it's an operational requirement.
Yeah, no, I mean there, quite frankly, it's not an arbitrary or irrational ground. The employer would have every right to insist, and it could ultimately, as long as processes were followed correctly, the employer would have every right to say to the employee, well, you aren't complying with a lawful and reasonable instruction, therefore we're going to take disciplinary action against you, which could ultimately lead to that employee's dismissal. It's not an irrational ground. It's a requirement, in particular in that environment, financial environment. Again, it's risk-based, and I think no court or judge anywhere would object to an employer mitigating its risk in that fashion, as long as proper process was followed and the employee understood the consequences of their actions and what might result in their dismissal if they continue to refuse.
Yeah, certainly. So it would be a Section 189 type process where dismissals based on operational requirements,
Yes.
where you'd say operationally this is required of you now, and you are in fact you'd indeed be rendered redundant if you don't agree, and then
Correct.
that could give rise to a dismissal, but based on operational requirements.
Correct.
I see there's a question. Have you ever dealt with voice stress testing?
I have. I myself am not a technical expert. I've engaged with third parties that do voice stress testing, that do the lie detectors. It's one of those things where it's like the tide, it seems to shift. Some of the experts not that long ago were telling you that the voice stress was the way to go, and now it seems to have shifted away from voice stress back to the normal polygraph. So I am familiar with it. It has been used, but at a technical level, I can't comment on the processes. All I can say is that recently I was engaging with a third party that runs these particular kinds of tests, and they said no, voice stress is now passé. It's not the flavor of the month anymore.
We got another question around the Protected Disclosures Act, and I think it's also pertinent in relation to working from home, and I guess there's also the question of interceptions. I mean, the Monitoring and Interception Act.
Yes.
So, I mean, obviously, the Protected Disclosures Act would apply regardless of whether you work from home, and there you recommend a whistleblowing line. I think it's important just for the audience to be made aware that the two provisions that cover whistleblowers. There's a provision, there's the Act, the Protected Disclosures Act, and then there are also provisions in the Companies Act protecting whistleblowers from criminal sanction, from actions, for instance, against them for defamation and more. So it's quite important there. And I think, David, the requirement there is that you'd have to follow the protocol of the company.
Yes.
So it's important for a company to actually set out a procedure. Otherwise, I stand to be corrected, but I think the Act says you have to report it to the next person in management or the next most senior person.
Yes, certainly. I would advise strongly that if you don't have a whistleblower policy, that you have one. And secondly, you don't just roll it out. You need to train the employees. You need to explain to them what it's for and the procedures to be followed so they understand it. And they also need to understand their protections. As Marie says, there's the two pieces of legislation. There's the particular Act, Protected Disclosure, more commonly known as Whistleblowers Act. And there's also then the provisions in the Companies Act, which go wider than the Whistleblower Act to protect not just employees, because the Whistleblower Act only protects employees, whereas Companies Act goes broader and protects shareholders and other parties. But I think the point is, yes, the Protected Disclosures Act would apply whether people are working remotely or wherever they are. They would still need to follow the proper processes in blowing the whistle on fraud or corruption or crime or whatever.
And it's okay to be wrong. So if you're mistaken and you blow the whistle, you're covered. It's okay to be wrong. So it's the requirement is so long as it's made in good faith.
Yeah, as long as it's bona fide in good faith, correct.
Yeah, for sure. Another interesting point I just want to touch on, and that is the identifying a fraudster, so a profile of a fraudster. Now, in this context, how on earth does one identify one? I know you touched on it, but the point I want to make is if everybody can be a fraudster, if everybody is desperate, what's the take home in relation to identifying somebody who's without and mindful of their rights to privacy and dignity and
yes.
what have you?
Yeah, look, on my screen here, I can see a couple of faces, and they all look like fraudsters to me. The point is, any one of us could be a fraudster. Again, there's been surveys over the years all around the world, and people have profiled them, or professionals have profiled the typical fraudster. So there'll be stats, for example, that the average fraudster is a male between the ages of sort of 40 and 45. Now, again, the short answer to that is, well, historically in the workplace, there are more men in senior positions than women. So one would expect men to be the typical fraudster as opposed to the females. Likewise, Why over the age of 40? Well, over the age of 40 is when you get into those senior positions. So, the profiling of a fraudster, or the typical fraudster image is, it can be quite fun, it can be quite funky, and it can be quite interesting. But the bottom line is, as Maurice, as you say, any one of us is a potential fraudster. So how does one identify, particularly in these circumstances? Because in the office environment, it could be relatively easy. If I now traditionally come to work driving a little Ford Figo or a small Toyota, now next thing I'm arriving in my Maserati, and I've moved from Brixton to Sandhurst. Those signs are typical giveaways, which are now much harder when you're not seeing your employees on a regular basis. You're not seeing the cars they drive. You're not seeing what their lifestyle is. But the lifestyle audit is a very, very good giveaway, because 9 times out of 10, if I look at the history of my career over many, many years, virtually every single time, had the employer or the relevant party taken the time to observe the way their employee was living, they would have seen something does not add up. Someone's earning 30 grand a month, but they're spending 180 to 200,000 a month. How is that possible? So the lifestyle audit is a very good barometer. People living beyond their means, made that much harder now by the remote working environment, because as an employer, you might not see people. So one would need to be a lot more proactive in that lifestyle kind of oversight to see what your employees are up to. And that goes back to the point I made earlier. With this remote environment, I think employers need to focus a heck of a lot more on communication, talking to their people, be it remotely or by Zoom, talking to your people on a regular basis, so you know what's going on in their lives and you can pick up what they're up to. The other way of identifying fraudsters is understanding the stresses. Go back to the fraud triangle. If in the course of discussions with your employees, it comes out that they are going through a divorce, or they are not meeting their financial obligations, there's some new stress in their life, there's been a death in the family or whatever, the minute their personal circumstances have changed, that leads to pressure, and a particular circumstance might well result in that moral compass or ethical compass of that particular individual shifting. So it all goes back to communication and understanding what's going on in your employees' lives. Also, one could do the following as an employer, is you have a policy whereby you have the right to do the background screening, beg your pardon, like Investec with their bookkeepers and their financial people. As a general principle, you're entitled to do credit checks, access TransUnion or whatever, and people must, your employees would be required to allow you to understand what stresses they're under. So you could do those financial checks, because it's well known that the minute someone is facing massive financial stresses, they are open to that pressure resulting in fraud or corruption. So an employee that has just debts mounting up all the time, you can bet your bottom dollar that not only is he personally facing stress, but it might well be he'd be a target for syndicates, because the syndicates are clever enough to target the people under financial stress, and they will induce them by offering them quite a nice payout to help them commit, the particular syndicate to commit fraud or corruption. So there are all those points, but I will concede that the shutdown has made it a heck of a lot harder to identify and profile those fraudsters, because it's now all remote, and one needs to, I think, box a lot cleverer in mitigating your risk in identifying those particular individuals.
How often, David, would you, outside of COVID, how often did you recommend lifestyle audits should be conducted by businesses? And now, under the present circumstances, has that changed?
Yes. Look, the lifestyle audit, I have a number of clients who actually do it once every 6 months. Government has started doing lifestyle audits, and I think it's only on an annual basis, But I've come across clients who do it every 6 months because they have a reasonable amount of turnover. I would recommend minimum of once a year, but with the shutdown, I would say one should be doing it once every 6 months, because there should be more stability. I think there's going to be far less job hopping now because with the economy being so tight, so jobs aren't available, so people are going to hang on to their jobs. So it won't be necessary to do that often. But again, the financial stresses start mounting up, and so it's a 6-month period would probably be an appropriate time period to start assessing what kind of stresses people are under.
On the question of financial stress, can employees, this is from a labor perspective, insist on the costs of their home office being paid by an employer, and to what extent?
That's a very interesting one. Effectively in the employment relationship, the employer has to provide the tools of the trade for the employee. Now, so the employer would provide the laptop, would provide the cell phone, would provide all those tools. Now, with the current circumstances being that the employee has to work from home, I think they'd be perfectly entitled to say to the employer, look, I don't have the money. You don't pay me enough. I'm at such a level where I don't have fiber. I don't have sufficient data to do my work. Therefore, you need to give me an allowance. You need or fund it. Or I might be in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have a workspace, so you'd have to help me by giving me a desk and a table or to work on. I think it's a perfectly reasonable request, and an employer would find itself hard pressed not to say or not to fulfill that obligation, because the employee has to work. They haven't chosen to work at home; they're obliged to, and so I think the employer would be obliged to fund that particular expense. I think the difficulty comes in where the employer might be in a business where the employees are entitled to go to the office, but the employer then says, well, we actually want you to stay at home. And then I think there's no option but for the employer to say, for the employer to foot the bill and say, we're going to have to fund everything for that particular employee.
I'm gonna seriously be impressed if you can answer this one, and it relates to a home office. So it's a curveball, and if you can answer it, great. But I know you're not a tax practitioner. But the question arises now that you're entitled to your primary rebates on capital gains tax, okay, on a residential property. What now if only half of it is residential because of the lockdown, because the other half is used for commercial purposes?
Yeah, now we're getting into an area of law that
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that.
Yeah.
Maurice, maybe I can pick up on that. If the employee has been refunded for the bricks and mortar, then you have a problem with capital gains tax. If it's merely contributing towards, as they were saying, fiber, telephone, heat rates, providing desks and computers, and then the employer, and there's an attraction here for companies as well, because the employee can get an allowance. It's tax effective in the employee's hands, and the company can still deduct the cost thereof. So there is a balance there to be done to allow employees to do that. That's fairly common in the consultancy business where people are working from home at the moment. But do watch out for the repairs and maintenance to the fabric of the building, because now you are taking the risk of interfering with your rebate on capital gains.
Brilliant. I think that's right. Thanks for that, Peter. I want to conclude just touching on interesting point you raised, David, and that was in relation to expenses, and there's certain expenses that one can look at. The question of insurance premiums, you touched on it. I know in the UK there's quite a movement to actually insist that the insurance companies adjust the premiums and give credits to the insured over the period because of the risk profile changing. Is there anything on the go in South Africa around it? Are you aware of anything?
Yeah, I am. At a basic level, for example, I myself received an email from my broker advising that the insurance on my 3 motor vehicles, the premiums will drop by, I think it's 25% each for the next, 3 months. So they have taken a proactive approach, just giving it to me without me even asking. I know a friend of mine who's a broker said he's in a dilemma because he's advising all his clients to reassess their premiums based on their lack of activity or economic activity. He says it affects his take-home pay because he obviously gets commission based on what they pay. But he says in all good honesty, and he's got to take a long-term view, he's got to advise them. And so he's told me that certainly in the industries he's operating in, and it's pretty diverse, the insurance companies are taking quite a benevolent approach, saying, yeah, we agree. The risk profile has changed dramatically. It makes commercial sense to alter the premiums for a particular period. So yes, it is happening in this country.
I think we're going to monitor that space because I think there are going to be benevolent insurance companies who are quite happy to do that voluntarily, and there are going to be others who won't be prepared to. So I think that's, COBRA is also about lobbying, and I think we need to watch the space. And if we see that consumers, the insured, are being treated unfairly in relation to premiums, then they must certainly raise it with us, and we'll begin the lobbying. I think that's it for today. Are there any further questions? If there are, please post them now. Otherwise, I'd like to thank David for an absolutely interesting and fabulous webinar. It's not going to be his last. I'm going to insist that you return.
All right.
COBRA hosts these webinars on a daily basis. We now have a general discussion on business rescue on Mondays. We will this week have focused webinars. Have a look at the COBRA website, cobra.org.za, for those. And I see there are no questions. Any comments from the panelists? If not, I'll wait.
Maurice, just from my side, I mean, and Dave, thanks for that. We spent a lot of time talking about employee fraud. Of course, from a business rescue point of view, and unfortunately, I've had the experience, company fraud is going to increase significantly as well. So, directors acting on behalf of the company. So the banks beware, suppliers beware, and employees beware, because you never know what the challenge is that's going to come from fraud at a director level. But we're going to see far more of that. Yeah. Just an interesting observation, and I agree with you 100%, Dave. One of the interesting things is, of course, whistleblowing starts going out the window, because how does whistleblowing work? It's because you see your colleague arriving in the new suit, the new car. You hear your colleague on the phone in the cubicle next to you. He manages to pass a comment that, he's falling out with his wife and he's going through a divorce. You pick that information up in a working environment, in office. That's lost if we're sitting at home. And one of the things that the companies can consider is opening the forums up, whether it's on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, and allowing staff to have that coffee machine chat every morning, 15 minutes, just sit around and shoot the breeze about life and how things are going. That's going to become far more important, because, of course, it's virtually impossible to interact at a social level with people when you can't see them. Yes. So you're not going to pick up the nuances that somebody's under huge pressure. So, managers won't know that their staff, unless they open up to them and try and engage with them over these bloody screens, which is almost impossible. So it is an important point you make there. I'm a great believer in management by walking around, and I can't walk around. I can walk around the bloody garden with a computer in my hand, and that's not exactly the same.
No, absolutely, yeah.
As one of our panelists, I see we've got Justin Sloan. Justin Sloan is a partner in our criminal practice, David, and he has confirmed that there has been an uptick in crimes. Obviously, it's not business that would want, but the department is busy, so it's already happening. Yeah,
I saw that coming. It's got to by default. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.
Right. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.